The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Humanity First. My name is Peter Evers, your host, and as you know, we are usually talking about issues of social justice and what kind of things in the world affect human beings, hence Humanity First. Today, we're actually taking a slightly different turn. We're going to be talking to Professor Julian Agyeman, who is a professor of urban and environmental policy and planning and a Fletcher Professor of rhetoric and debate at Tufts University. And full disclosure, a friend of mine and somebody who came from the town next to mine when we were growing up, so we have a little bit of history. But we're really going to talk about about sustainability, but not just sustainability, the issue of sustainability through justice. We as a country are committed to a greening of the planet, but are we bringing everybody with us? Is this an idea of belonging for all of humanity as we green the planet? Or is it for just some people, those people who have means? And I think it's a really important conversation right now, because in Brockton ourselves, we are not necessarily bringing everybody along with us when we look at some of the ordinances that have been passed recently relative to our unhoused population and making it more difficult for people to exist in our town without really a social policy that speaks to where those people will go. So Julian will be with us, so stick around.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm an essential worker here at BAMSI, and I'm a nurse. Nurses are essential here at BAMSI because as nurses, we really have the opportunity to make an impact. We have very small ratios, so we have the opportunity to really learn everything about the person served and be able to give the best care. It really serves such a great purpose for me as being a nurse, and really why I came into nursing. Learn more about nursing opportunities at bamsijobs.org.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
And welcome back, everybody, to Humanity First. My name is Peter Evers, and as I promised at the top of the show, we have a very special guest today for a number of different reasons. One is because he is a towering intellect, and secondly, because he's a really good friend of mine as well, and that qualifies for an awful lot in this program. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you, Peter.
And thank you so much for coming on the show. For those who listen to this show on a regular basis, we tackle all sorts of issues, but the issues usually relate back to humanity. Hence Humanity First, I suppose, and how we, as a society, manage all of the pressures that are on people. And because we provide human services here at BAMSI, we deal with a lot of issues of social justice. In fact, I don't think you can do this kind of work without an eye to social justice. And Julian, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is somebody who has really been looking at justice through many lenses, but particularly through environmental justice and sustainability, this idea of how we can be a sustainable planet, but also be a planet that is belonging of everybody. And really, I want to talk, Julian, a little bit about your idea of just sustainability, because I believe that you're the first person that coined that expression a few years ago. I won't say how many years ago, but can you start by just letting us know what just sustainability might mean?
Yeah, certainly, Peter. If we were to go out onto the streets of any town or city and ask 10, 20 people what they thought the word sustainability means, of those that had an opinion, I think 90%, maybe even 100% would say, yeah, it's about the environment. And yes, it is about the environment. It's about the recognition that we need to live within the limits of this planet, and we're not doing very well at that, but more about that later. But we could also then think about, okay, it's about the environment, it's about green things. Let's just put regulations out there that make people behave in a green fashion. But I could still see social injustice, even if we made the planet a green planet. I mean, take, for instance, Minneapolis is probably the second greenest city in the United States in terms of its park systems, in terms of its running tracks, its bike trails. It's a very green city, but it's deeply socially unjust. So green doesn't mean social justice. So when I was thinking 20, 25 years ago about can we change the way people think about sustainability, green is important, but so is social justice. So we just came up with the concept of just sustainabilities. And you notice I use the plural, just sustainabilities, because there is no one prescription. If we say just sustainability, it sounds like there's one cookie cutter
Right.
prescription. And there isn't. It's going to look different in Brockton, in Birmingham, Alabama, in Boston. So we use the plural, but the same principles will apply. But these towns and cities have different sort of cultures and mores, if you like, different political affiliations. So we can envision just sustainabilities as a plural because it's a flexible concept and it needs to be a flexible concept. And so let me just quickly define it. Improving people's quality of life now and into the future in a just and equitable manner while living within the limits of supporting ecosystems. So it's quite a simple formulation, really. Um, Obviously, the devil is in the detail, though.
Yeah, yeah, it sort of reminds me of a little bit of a Jenga puzzle, doesn't it? We're actually not just talking about one thing, but we're talking about how we can sustain for generations what we're doing now. And I want to talk about that a little bit because, in some ways our society is interested in utility as opposed to the beauty of the planet that we live on. And by the way, I've heard you call it an unhappy planet. And I love that expression. It reminds me of what George Carlin used to say, about save the planet. He would jokingly say the planet's gonna be fine. It's just the people on it that are gonna perish. And that was a message, what, 50 years ago. But this idea of making sure that this is a future for generations that is green, but is for everybody. And, that really does dovetail with the work that we're doing here in Brockton, which, by the way, is a city I'm so proud to be associated with over the last 35 years. It is a gateway city. It's a gateway city in the sense that it is where people can come and that people can feel welcome for the most part, and that they have previously had the opportunity to work and to get housing and to get a foot on the ladder of prosperity in America. Not so much anymore. There are some things that really worry me. Talk about this notion of belonging, because also with that comes this idea of it's not just for a few people who live in single family zoned areas. Our sustainability should be for everybody. And it hasn't been by history, has it? Because when we talk about fighting something, we're not fighting from year now, we're fighting from redlining. We're fighting from zoning laws that once redlining was outlawed became a workaround. So we're not starting from zero around this issue of racial bias, right?
No, absolutely. But I just do want to pick up on that word belonging because I think it's an incredibly important word, and it's a deeply held concept within the notion of just sustainabilities. But I also want to team it with this word becoming. And you just told me what Brockton is becoming, and it's becoming a place where people less and less feel they can belong because of the house price increases, etc. And so I see a big tension within sustainable communities, within sustainable cities, within the sustainability debate, because we in urban planning and sustainability, we're always thinking about what does the future hold? What can this community become? And we're forgetting about the complementary principle of belonging. And as cities become more green, they become well, let me just tell you, whiter and more affluent.
Right.
It costs money in the US to live in green communities, in communities where we slow down the traffic, we put in bike lanes, we put bump outs, we put seats in, we put street trees in. These amenities, unfortunately, are part of what we might call gentrification. And we gentrify communities, and a new group of people comes in, and they have different ideas about what their area can become. And so those who don't belong or don't share the same values or ideas are often pushed out either by economic means or even, by, well, physical means. Park benches don't have armrests on them because of your comfort. They do that to stop homeless people sleeping on them.
Right.
There's a whole study on what's called defensive architecture and defensive design that is encouraging people to move on, basically. And then we have governors of certain states who fly their undocumented people to other states. When you and I lived in London back in the day, in the 80s, it was well known that the city of Westminster pushed its homeless people over to Lambeth and Southwark, which were of a different political persuasion. So we're very good at disbelonging people. And the danger with this then is that cities will become what the elites who can afford to live there want them to become. And so just sustainability is about bridging that gap that is increasing between what cities can become and who gets to belong in the city.
Yeah, what really stands out for me in that is that sort of justice, that notion of justice doesn't happen by accident. In the same way that we created these differences, people were intentional about it, right? They were intentional about making sure that people of color didn't live in certain areas. We need intentionality to restore justice or to repair justice in a way, right? This notion that it's not just going to happen, and everyone's, well, we believe in it, I hope it's happened. We have to do some social engineering here, right, to ensure that there is belonging, to ensure, actually, just sort of extrapolating that point, Boston is a good example, right, of a city that is becoming more and more difficult for normal people to live, right? And so the elite is going to build places in places like Seaport, but who's going to be the trash collector? Who's going to be the person who's doing the social work in the schools? Who's going to be the teacher? Are we going to be in a position where we're having to build housing for the working people, which is a really worrying notion for me?
Yeah, yes, but I also want to go back to your point about the intentionality of justice. Social justice never simply happens. We don't trip over it and say, oh, social justice. No, it has to be front and center in our policy making and planning. And one of the reasons why I'm impressed with what Mayor Wu has done is take, for instance, her food justice policy. It states food justice is racial justice. It's a recognition that our food deserts, or areas of food apartheid, as I call them, are not an accident. These are there. These are in the redlined neighborhoods, the neighborhoods that get hotter because there's less trees and more dark surface asphalt and parking lots and larger roads. If we're going to tackle food injustice, climate injustice, environmental injustice, we need to center justice in our policies. A lot of people think, oh, let's get the economics, the science, the technology right in our policy making, and then justice and equity become a second order kind of desire. It doesn't work that way. You have to center ideas of justice to get more justice. So, for instance, the city of Belo Horizonte in Brazil, in 1992, decided, look, our food system isn't working for everybody here. We've got malnutrition, kids are failing in schools. 30 years on, 35, nearly 35 years on, it still has the most advanced food system in the world because the city of 6 million actually intervenes directly in the food system. They recognize the need for food with dignity, food as social justice, and these are the central pillars of the department of the city government that controls access to food. And the great food writer Francis Moore Lappe called Belo Horizonte the city that abolished hunger. The city runs its own people's restaurants, and they're very popular. I actually visited one when I was there in 2012. These are places where students, people who are unhoused or homeless, there are tourists go there. And for like $1, you can get a really excellent meal. But it's, you imagine if there were places like that in the US, they would be seen as slop houses. These are really nice places because the principle of food with dignity is applied. So when we think about placing justice at the center of our policy making, not as some kind of goal that is second or third order, when we put justice at the center, we're also placing human dignity at the center. And I'm constantly telling my students that, policy making must increase human dignity. It's a theme I know in your show. I mean, about humanity. Policy making must increase human dignity. I live in Cambridge. Now, yes, very expensive and, gentrifying rapidly, but you can barely tell some of the more social housing in Cambridge because the city recognizes we do not want to stigmatize people by making the housing look as if it is council run and owned housing. So I think this idea of centering justice, being mindful about it, is absolutely essential because when I look at urban planning and the way our cities are, it's no accident that they are segregated. Let me give you the example again of Minneapolis. Minneapolis in the late 1800s, late 1900s, yeah, was a relatively integrated city. The African American population, the population of color, was fairly well distributed. And then in the early part of the 20th century, racialized covenants started to come in. This home shall not be let or sold to anybody other than members of the Caucasian race. You know the stuff.
Yep.
And within 30 years, you have the emergence of the North and South Minneapolis, the people of color neighborhoods. 1917, the racialized zoning was outlawed, so cities were scrambling. How are we going to segregate? Let's do single family zoning, large lot zoning. 70% of Minneapolis is that, which means basically it wasn't a racial calculus, it was a socioeconomic calculus. But people who made that calculation knew that the people who could afford to live in these places would be white. Then you had redlining. So the effect is segregation then and now. Although these policies are outlawed, the effects still live on. So the only way to change these draconian, racist, white supremacist laws and policies that have had such a long historical and contemporary effect is through centering justice. And, to their credit, Minneapolis 2040, the city's comprehensive plan, really does look at the number one policy goal is eliminating inequality. And I think it's a great goal. They got some work to do, but we need to start somewhere. And the notion of eliminating inequality and centering justice, I think, is absolutely essential.
Yeah, and it actually makes economic sense as well. When we think of, just go back to Belo Horizonte because I love that example. I've read that you said that even though political sort of power changed several times during that period of time, there was no adjustment of this notion of food with dignity because it works, because you get better education. Kids are coming to school and they're fed and they learn and they contribute to the economy. It's this rolling ball of success economically, as well as, as the right wing would say, these fuzzy liberal ideas of yours.
I absolutely. And I think, look, This is the great hope for progressive policy making and progressive policy makers and progressives like me and like you, Peter. Um, if you can come up with popular policy making that makes sense for everybody, it's very difficult then for a mayor to come in of a different political persuasion. And remember, the original mayor that implemented this policy in Belo Horizonte was a Socialist Worker Party politician. But there's been a succession of less left wing, more right wing mayors. Nobody has unpicked this policy because it's so popular in a city of 6 million. And again, we can look around the world. Boris Johnson didn't stop the congestion pricing in London. That came in under Ken Livingstone, who was, a socialist. Boris Johnson, okay, he didn't rapidly expand it, but it was popular with businesses, popular with the bus companies, popular with people. So he didn't unpick it.
Right.
So the good news then is, I think if we can come up with popular policy making that works for people and is seen to be fair, then we can move forward.
Yeah, there's nothing like an argument that makes economic sense and fits in with progressive thoughts. And I think about Mayor Livingstone when he did that. And before, yeah, it was when he was at the GLC, wasn't it? The Greater London Council. And, what he said then, I believe, was that every penny of this, i.e., it won't go into a politician's pocket. Every penny of this will be plowed back into sustainable transportation. And people then see, oh my goodness, there's actually a payoff for me here. And we can still get to a place where we're looking after the planet and we're allowing people to move around freely around wherever they live. I mean, what a big win that was.
Absolutely. And also, they did a lot of sort of community consultation before they rolled out the plans. And so it's, yeah, and I think this point, though, that all of the taxes, all of the congestion pricing goes into sustainable transportation, making bus lanes better, creating new bike lanes, making the sidewalks, the pavements much more, walker friendly, if you like. People saw and could feel the changes that were happening. And I think that's the thing. If you can actually get people to connect with where their taxes are going, people are generally, I think, would be supportive of seeing traffic moving more freely, cyclists moving around, buses not having to go around parked cars. It works for everyone, and it contributes to belonging as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and those health outcomes as well. I think about a decade ago, I was doing some work in Roxbury, and I found out that 02129, sorry, 19, the zip code for Roxbury, had the highest rate of asthma in the world, which is really interesting because it's a stone throw from some of the best research hospitals in the world as well. We're not doing a great job if we're doing that. But I do think, and I know we have to wrap up in a second, but what rings in my ears, and in a time when we seem to be as a world leaning towards the right, where we tending to be a little bit more reactionary, and I'm not talking about America, Joss. I'm talking about Hungary. I'm talking about Italy. I'm talking about some Germany. 20% of the far right got 20% votes. But your words ring in my ear, which is that progressive ideas that are well argued, debated with people, so that people can see a different way, is what is sustainable, because reactionary politics is not sustainable. And I think that's the hope for the future.
Absolutely. Peter, I just want to quickly jump back to the Roxbury example you gave there. If you live in Beacon Hill, 3-4 miles from Roxbury, you can expect to live about 20 years longer than the average person in Roxbury. Harvard University School of Public Health came up with this notion that actually it's your zip code that's more important than your genetic code in determining your lifespan in a lot of American cities. It's as stark as that. And, um, you know, whatever city you go to in the United States, you will see that the poorer neighborhoods lifespan is much less. And life, happy life years are much less as a result. So, yes, it is as stark as that. And that's called spatial injustice. You shouldn't, the geography of your local environment should not determine the length of your life.
Right.
And so a facet of this notion of environmental justice is how do we combat spatial injustice? But yes, to finish, progressive policy making works. And I can see that if we can have 1, 2, 3 wins, people will see that, that this is not about socialism or right-wing politics. It's just the right politics. Very final point I want to leave you with. In 1988, the German Greens held the balance of power in the German the Bundestag, in the parliament. And somebody asked them, well, are you on the right or the left? And they said, we're neither right nor left, we're just ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we've been talking about now is ahead politics. Taxation, right wing maybe, or no taxes, right wing. I think we need a new politics for a just sustainability, and it will borrow from what was traditionally considered left or right.
Right.
And so we need to create a new politics for these times because issues are so complex now that no one political analysis, I think, can actually encompass all of the challenges. And certainly my students want to see a new politics emerge.
Yeah. And, as we finish, I think about, the people who originally settled this land, that we're on now, and a nod to the Wampanoags and the other tribe. Their view of living on a planet is very, very similar to what you just described. So we can learn so much from this notion of moving away from utility of the land towards living on the land, being part of the land. A river is for the beauty of the land as opposed to creating electricity, and moving away from some of those sort of immediate benefit to understanding our world in a different way.
And here's an idea for another program for you. There's a whole new emerging idea of multi-species justice. So justice to mountains, to rivers. And just a couple of days ago, the New Zealand government gave personhood to a very sacred mountain for the Maori people. Rivers, forests, mountains in New Zealand are now gaining personhood and therefore gaining certain rights. And what are we doing? We are taking away the indigenous names, Denali, and replacing the white supremacist name, Mount McKinley. We're going backwards. New Zealand is going forwards.
And we can learn an awful lot if we care to pay attention to what else is going on in the world. Julian, thank you so much. This was amazing as ever. And I really appreciate you coming on. And hopefully we can do this again because there is so much more to talk about.
Great. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.